talk about climate change impacts on California and Ventura County agriculture. Dr. Pathak is an associate professor of UC Cooperative Extension, focusing on climate adaptation in agriculture at UC Merced. His statewide research and extension focuses on translating weather and climate information into useful agricultural decision support systems tailored to grower needs. He holds PhD, MS, and PS degrees in agricultural engineering. Tapan.
Thank you. Should I keep it on or muted for the... Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, we still have to share screen.
What did you think?
No, yeah. We hit share screen. That's correct.
Okay, good morning, everyone. And thanks, Daniel, for such an enlightening talk. As you always learn something new when you have such a important talk. But anyways, today I'm gonna talk more about, we know these changes are happening, but how is it impacting agriculture? I'm a cooperative extension specialist. My training is in all climate and agricultural interactions and from the engineering perspective. And today I'm gonna talk more broadly about California and Ventura specific impacts on agriculture. Okay, so this is preaching to the choir. We all know how important agriculture is for the state, but just to show the diversity, we have so many farms, more than 76, or those numbers change year to year. But anyways, it's a $60 billion plus industry. It's a top ranked if we compare 50 states. And there's a big scale difference in how much we produce versus other states. And if you think about acres of land dedicated for agriculture, well, we have 100 million acres of land, but only about 9 million acres is irrigated agriculture. So it's less than 10% of the total land, and we are producing those many commodities, and these are all irrigated. So, water becomes a central part of irrigated agriculture that we have in the state. We are leading producer. Dairy production is the leading commodity. 3/4 of the fruits and nut productions, 1/3 of the vegetable production, and these are the top 10 commodities statewide. Now, there are many of those commodities are also in Ventura County as well, right? And I think, although the commodities do change year to year in their values and all, but I think, majority of them or most of them are specialty crops. And the reason why I'm showing is, so if you think about how climate is impacting, even if it is, impacting 10%, 5%, 1%, you're talking in millions of dollars of impacts, right? Because of the scale of agriculture that we have in the state. If you think and this is for Ventura, top 10 commodities, as you can see, strawberries are the major crop here, but then we have so many of the unique subtropical crops that we grow in Ventura County, and from climate impact perspective, these crops are sensitive to the changes, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those impact that we are seeing. So I'm not going to talk more about the changes from the climate side because Daniel has given a very comprehensive overview. Just to show this figure, this is last 100 plus years of changes in temperatures. The red bar is changes in maximum temperatures, and the blue bar is changes in minimum temperatures. And this is divided across different climate zones, right? So let's say if we focus on Central Coast and South Coast in general, or in general across California, the rate of increase in minimum temperatures have been substantially higher than the maximum temperatures. And this is again historical, not the projected changes in the future. So what we have seen in minimum temperatures have been substantially higher, and I think if we talk about the coast, those changes have been even higher magnitude than other regions. But I think, if we think this changes in minimum temperatures, there are so many consequences that I'll talk about in following slides. But let's say the Sierras region, Daniel mentioned about snowpack and less snow, more rain. This is all related to the minimum temperatures and like winters and the overall in the Sierras region, temperature is warming up, and which is relating all to the less snowpack and more water as a rainfall. And this is a trend for precipitation, both historical and the future. Now, as Daniel mentioned, you have a lot of ups and downs, but there is clearly no trend. So and these are the cumulative precipitation, historical and the future. What you see is, more variability on both extremes. But if you draw a line across, it'll be a flat line. So, you would say just by looking at the average that there is no clear trend historically or in the future. But what it shows, as Daniel mentioned, extremes, like, both extremes are increasing. So you will have more flood-like conditions as well as drought conditions as we move into the future. And overall wet season is shrinking. So even if we get the same amount of rain, we are going to expect those rain coming from a small, the shorter window of or a wet season. So, the individual events might be more extreme. Okay, so the snowpack, as that's our natural water storage, and this is uh, a little bit of a dated slide. I think it was from the National Climate Assessment some time ago. I mean, it clearly shows the edge level, which is about 30 years on your left. And if you think about the projected changes, you'll see anywhere from 40 to 70% decline. And even if we take mid-range by 2050 or so, you'll still have 20% decline in the snowpack. They projected in the past. And so, this could be bad news for the snowpack in our region. Okay, so extreme heat, as Daniel mentioned, that we are going to expect more increase in intensity and frequency of extreme heat. Now, the way extreme heat is defined, it depends on the region, depends on the time frame. In this case, we are taking 1960 to 1990, so it's about 30 years, 60 to 2000 level. And the extreme heat is the 90th percentile or 90th fifth percentile up. So like, what's the extreme in that time frame for Ventura County, for example? And that threshold is about 89 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's your upper threshold for that extreme heat. What this figure is showing, and this is from CalAdapt, that historically you had roughly about 3 days for this particular area where temperature exceeded that 89 degrees Fahrenheit threshold. Now, this is an average, right? Average over this time frame. If you take that threshold and put the projection numbers in future by mid-century, you will have 16 to 20 days where the temperature exceeding that threshold. And now that 16 to 20 is again based on the scenarios that we are taking into account. So it could be a low emission scenario, high emission scenario, depending on. So right now we are moving in the high emission scenario anyway. So I think, roughly in that range. And by end of the century, you'll have 20 to 40 days where temperature exceeds that number. So this is for the maximum temperature. But then we also have warmer nights. And that is the warmer nights for this region defined as temperature exceeding 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So, imagine any particular crop. They all have their optimum temperature window. So within that temperature window, like an upper and lower range, crops can thrive in that within that the temperature fold. If things go beyond that, then so the crops are under stress. And especially with the warmer nights, rate of respiration for crops increases to an extent that it can impact on productivity side. So that's why I think, it's also important to look into this temperature, the nighttime temperature as one additional indicator. And you have the similar trend that by mid-century you had 20 to 30 days and 30 to 60 days by end of the century where the warmer nights or temperature exceeding 60 degrees Fahrenheit at night. And also the timing of extreme heat. So these dots are representing extreme heat days. If you look historically, which is on that side, you have less dots, which means that, in this region, there is less number of extreme heat days historically. Now, if you move into the future, it gets denser during those summer months, June, July, August, but then it also spreads. Like, it starts as early as May and could go as long as October, November, right? And so having those extreme heat events early and late in the season can also have impact on agriculture. Okay, so we talked about changes in temperature. We talked about changes in extreme heat conditions. We talked about variability of rainfall. Let's talk about how these changes could affect agriculture, different aspects of agriculture at the state level and some on the Ventura County level. So a few years ago, I have a project funded by USDA NIFA. And I think, the idea was to, talk more about climate smart agriculture, adaptation practices, and provide more statewide support for growers, for technical service providers. But before we started this, we also wanted to get growers' perspective on what they think about how climate is affecting their production, their practices. And so we did a statewide survey. We also did statewide focus groups in different regions. And, these are some of the quotes from growers and technical service providers. And again, this is not Ventura specific. This is more statewide and across so many different commodities. And so couldn't be generalized for this region, but I think, it relates to this region. Our crops may have to change, which also means the market needs to change. Fuel, water be the feast or famine. We talked about those both extremes, and I think growers are mentioning about those conditions. It's going to be harder. Already, we are harvesting crops much earlier than what 30 years ago, and we've been seeing those because of this warmer temperatures. Your growth stages reach faster and faster, and so your maturity is faster. When we talked about the concerns, obviously the one of the biggest concerns is related to water. So water availability is what growers are most concerned about. Groundwater decline, crop water stress. So the crop stress because of the water stress, drought severity, extreme heat damages, pest and disease pressure, climate related crop losses, wildfire, smoke damage. I think there's a less concern because, I mean, again, this is not one region. So if you take the survey and in the fire prone area, then that would become one of the most important ones, right? And so it depends on the region as well as flooding. So you get the idea that, like, what we are talking about. I think there is also a similar concern from grower side, but we also talked about the barriers of or limitations of adaptation and what sort of support they need. Yeah, so this is kind of the very superficial summary of what the need assessment, but it was pretty comprehensive, and this is kind of a generalized version of it. They are implementing adaptation practices, but they are interested in incentive programs because I think even if you want to implement something, there has to be a financial support for them to be able to implement and see the results, and also a high need for adaptation practices that are really very region specific, crop specific, rather than very generalized idea about what adaptation look like. And they also indicated significant interest in decision support system and how can we make resources more useful and usable. Okay, so this is one of the positive sides of climate change is across the state we are seeing reduced frost risk. Um, and this on your left, the time series is showing the last spring freeze is the spring frost is shifting earlier, and so you're seeing the decline in those spring freeze. And in general, for the 21st mid 21st century, the frost exposure is reduced by 70 to 80%. And so again, this is I would say year to year variability is still going to be an issue. So you will still have. The other big impact that we can think about is related to the past respond to
Okay, folks, can you guys hear and see us again? Okay, we're back
Okay,
to track
perfect.
there.
Excellent. Okay, so we did run some climate models for certain pests, and this is just an example. This is not a pest relevant for this region, but just to give an idea, codling moth, peach twig borer, oriental fruit moth, these are some of the important pests for nut crops and stone fruits and others. And if you look from left to right, you start seeing the changes in color. So blue and yellow over that side reaching red towards the end of the century, which tells us that, by mid or end of the century, we are adding one or two additional generations of these pests in this region. We also ran for navel orange worm, which is also another very damaging pest for nut crops, and we are seeing the similar trend. And when we talk to the growers there, some of the growers in the southern part of the Central Valley, they started mentioning that we are seeing those additional generations of pests. Now the problem with adding one additional generation is, the first generation you might have less population, but for every additional generation their population increases exponentially. And so, having that kind of pressure on crop, and especially if it coincides with the critical growth stage, then it could be a problem for crops. The other implication, length of growing season. So the spring frost is shifting early, fall frost is shifting later, and you have a more frost-free season. But at the same time, we are also seeing impacts on the phenology of the crop. Like, you might start seeing flowering happening earlier than used to. And depending on the crop, like, we ran some model for tomatoes, and we found that from planting, or the emergence or the transplanting to maturity, that time frame is shrinking by almost 2 weeks by mid-century to the end of the century. So, there is a implication on the processor side as well. We are now running some really crop-specific vulnerabilities, and, like, every crop has their critical indicators, and the climate is shifting. At the same time, phenology is also shifting. So we are coinciding both and running some models. So for example, in this case, when temperature reaching or exceeding 26 degrees Celsius during the bud burst and flowering for grapes, and all the red area is showing, it's going to go worse in future. On your right is frost risk during bud break and flowering. The green is good, which means that, overall frost risk is declining in certain parts, but you still have red in other regions. Um, the heat risk during variation and maturity, which is a critical part, especially for the quality aspect, and minimum temperature during maturity. These are the indicators specific to grapes, similar to we are running for top 10 commodities in California, and strawberry is part of it. And it shows temperature greater than 24 degrees Celsius from March through November, so the critical growth period. And as you can see, is going upwards. There's a number of days when temperature goes beyond that. And the optimum temperature window is on your right. As you can see, there is a lot of variability, but if you think about the future, it's declining. So the optimum temperature window is declining for strawberry production region, and this is again region specific indicators. So these are the types of changes that we are starting to see with changes in temperature and precipitation. I think I'll summarize this information, and um, so I think, climate changes is already impacting, and the changes are already evident in California. Temperature, shifting precipitation, extreme heat, etc. And we talked about, water is a central part, and I think it adds, having that uncertainty adds risk. And also there are risks of both extremes, drought and flood, requiring more proactive water management actions. And we talked about crop specific vulnerabilities, and these are emerging, especially with the heat and pest pressure, the phenological shift, and overall growing season shift. Um, Growers are in need for more actionable information on, and if we can provide those region crop specific information that is useful to them, that's needed. From the research side, I think, we know that things are changing. We know the extreme heat rate of extreme heat is increasing. Rate of other extremes are increasing, flood and drought and all. How is it really impacting crops? We need to do more crop specific studies. And so I think, we need that kind of information. We rely on models a lot, but I think, models need to be really parameterized to be able to use for this type of work and research. And I think when we think about the research, we need to be more holistic in our approach, not just purely looking from agronomy point of view, but also social and economic, and how can we provide more holistic package and research product is important. Weather information, we need to find a way to make it more robust and actionable for growers. And I think simply providing this information is not enough. I think we need to have that engagement from the beginning of the process. With that, I'll stop. Thank you. Do we have time for question?
One question.
Sorry, I went too long.
Any questions in the room? Online?
There's one online.
Oh, there is.
One question. I think you said that the window for optimum strawberry growing had declined. Can you talk about that a little more?
Yeah, sure. So, when we think about the crops, they have upper and lower temperature thresholds. So, if temperature goes beyond that upper level, then technically crops stop growing or they don't have efficient growing window. And same for going below that threshold level, right? And so what's happening is that the temperature is not staying within that window, although the minimum temperatures might be going up, but the upper threshold is going even further. So you are exceeding that window, and there is another term called diurnal temperature, which is the difference between the minimum and maximum temperature. So that window is also shrinking, and so you typically don't get the optimum window that you hope for the crops to grow perfectly in that window. That's changing because of the temperature changes in general. So
Do you have a number of days?
that's what we are. So that product is fresh. Like we haven't published it yet, but I think this is exactly what we are trying to do is quantify how many days we are getting the optimum temperature window is shrinking to that level. So yeah. All right.
The online question is, data for the San Joaquin Valley indicated little change in max temps over time. How does that affect predictions for more intense evapotranspiration?
Yeah, so the ET demand for crops is definitely on the rise. So even if the max temperature is only, and then this is again historical changes, what the projections are showing is increase in the maximum temperature window as well. So we cannot totally look at the historical side and think about the future. I think the projection that maximum temperature is also increasing. Now, I think the overall, both minimum and max overall crop ET demand is going to go up.
Thank you so much.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, we're at a point where we're going to take